Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Today I finished War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. It feels like something of a milestone, and so I thought I should do a video about it. I cannot do a review of this book. I also have the Briggs translation here, which is a copy that I will be getting rid of now. I will hold on to this, which is the famous Maud translation. So I feel that I should at least reflect on the experience a little bit. During the course of reading it, I loved every aspect of the novel. It felt flawless to me. And then towards the end, well, there are two epilogues added to the end of the novel. So the action stops in 1812, I believe. And then there is an epilogue 1 and epilogue 2. Epilogue 1 consists of 16 chapters, the first 4 of which delve into Tolstoy's historiography, if you will. It's fairly tedious. Now, prior to that, the book, depending on how you look at it, some editions will say parts and some will say books. The book has distinct divisions, and frequently at the beginning of any of those divisions, there would be a chapter, even sometimes 2 chapters, devoted solely to musings upon history, as I called it, Tolstoy's historiography. And those really tended to set the tone for the subsequent action in that book or that volume. So in the first epilogue, there are 4 chapters devoted to historiography, and I found them rather tedious. And then after that, the rest of epilogue 1 is devoted to following the characters, the same characters that you followed during the course of the novel, at least a good portion of them. And in a way, I didn't care for it just because that sort of technique, that sort of summing up has been so overused. How many movies have you seen where the action ceases and then it cuts to 20 years hence or what have you? So this follows them 7 years afterwards. And I generally don't like large time shifts in novels, regardless. But I was glad, at least for the closure, that the remainder of that epilogue provided. So then there is a second epilogue, which is a little bit shorter. It's if that was 16, the second epilogue is 12 chapters in length, and that is entirely devoted to Tolstoy's philosophical musings. So the first part of it, again, reverts to historiography and is even more tedious than the historiographical chapters in the first epilogue. Tolstoy seems largely concerned with rebuting a style of history that was possibly prevalent in his day, that is not really similar to the kind of history that we read now. Possibly we have caught up with Tolstoy in our interests. I can't speak for that. And then the chapter shifts from the historiographical aspect to basic philosophy, a discussion about free will versus determinism in the actions of history. And I found that a little bit less tedious, in parts quite interesting, actually. But all in all, the 2 epilogues taken together were a hard slog for me. So while when I was reading, I felt, oh, I can see why people set this book down and immediately pick it up again for a reread. After the epilogues, I thought, well, I'm not so sure about that. Actually, I felt pretty sure that I would not, because I would not want to reread the novel and then skip the epilogues. It just wouldn't somehow seem fair. But if I were ever to reread the novel, that is indeed what I would do, unless somehow, come the time, they struck me differently, which is, I suppose, possible, but it's not likely that I will reread this book. And it also, unfortunately, I loved the novel so much, but it also made me think, well, now I will never reread Anna Karenina, also by Tolstoy, which is probably the first long novel that I ever read. I had a Signet paperback, which I believe was a David Magarshak translation, though I'm not sure about that. I was still a teenager, and I couldn't say that I loved the book. And so reading War and Peace, I thought, well, if I return to it now, possibly I will get more out of it than when I was young and inexperienced. So I came away with the conclusion that I would give this book a star rating of 4 out of 5. I don't give star ratings to books, but it's a sort of common currency or parlance on BookTube. A lot of people do make star ratings of books. And if the book had just ended at the last part of the main narrative, I think I would have given it a 4.5. At that stage, not everything had resolved very happily. Things were left hanging as far as the character trajectories. And so the little bit of additional 7 years after knowledge that we got of these people did help to provide a little bit of closure. I know that's not a good word, but it did help to tie up things a little bit. And so my final memories of some of these characters will be as they appeared in that epilogue. But really, the inclusion of all of that end matter about history and of philosophy really kicked the book down a notch. I felt years ago I went to a symposium with many illustrious speakers, and at the end of it there were questions and answers allotted, but time was short. So the people had to clear out of that space, and so they allotted, I don't know what it was, 10 minutes or so. And so people would be given the microphone and ask a question, and then whichever of the speakers would answer it, or they would all answer it. And then one guy got the microphone and he started talking about himself, and I did the, and some people will preface their question with something like that. I was a fan of yours, and I read this, and then I would like to know. But this guy went on and on with the microphone. And then finally, at some point, I was going to say somebody, but it was me, yelled out, "What was the question?" And then the guy was a little bit startled because he had been talking and talking all about himself. And then he asked his question. Well, I felt that at the end of War and Peace, Tolstoy was a little bit like that guy with the mic. He had your attention throughout this whole long novel, and then he just wanted to tell you everything about it. He wanted to give you his philosophy and make sure that you got the message darn good. So that is the end of War and Peace. I had been initially thinking about plunging right into Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I will be postponing that for now. We shall see what happens. The next novel I will be approaching is Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, but in the interim, I'm going to be just catching up on some other things and delving into The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery, something different. So that is my experience with Tolstoy. This is the Everyman's Library edition, and it ends with an appendix which features Tolstoy talking about his epic. And he said, because other people will be talking about it, I want to clear the air. Partly he reiterates things that he already addressed in the appendices, in the epilogues. And he it lets you know that his book War and Peace is not a novel. It's something of a mixed form. Well, I think the book has come to fame deservedly as a novel, and I would say indeed that War and Peace is a novel. It is indeed a great novel. But I have this book, which I had been thinking about delving into. There is a famous essay by Isaiah Berlin called The Hedgehog and the Fox, which I've heard about for a long time. And I just think I will not be reading it. It touches upon Tolstoy's view of history. And I have coming from the library a volume of essays edited by Harold Bloom all about Tolstoy's War and Peace. And I will probably glance at those. I am not really so interested in literary criticism these days. So I will lay Tolstoy to rest. If I approach him in the future, it will be for his short stories and probably not his essays. That was the negative impact of his epilogues upon me. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.